"Don't come to my wedding. You're no longer my family." The text from my only daughter, Emily Parker, lit up my phone like a cold blade. Just 8 words, but enough to sever 28 years of fatherhood. I stared at the screen, listening to the slow tick of the wall clock in my empty house. She had chosen her new wealthy family, people who bought affection with credit cards and gold-plated promises. And me, just an aging man on a pension, still keeping my late wife's photo album on the living room table. I didn't answer with anger. I typed 2 words understood. Then I set the phone down. But in my mind, a different door opened, one for my years in banking that taught me a truth: every secret leaves a trail. Over the next 3 days, my phone didn't stop vibrating. 83 calls. At first, the commanding voice of Richard Thompson, Emily's new dad, telling me to act like a man. Then Jason, her fiancé, awkwardly asking me to help calm Emily down. And finally, Emily herself, her voice trembling, begging me to attend the wedding. But once your own blood has cut you off, silence becomes a weapon. And I knew, when the time came, my strike wouldn't just hit their hearts. It would go straight for their money and the reputation they thought was untouchable. If you've ever faced a betrayal like this, stay with me and subscribe, because we share real revenge stories you'll never forget. My name is Robert Parker. I'm 58 years old, and for the first time in my life, my house feels too quiet. Seattle's rain was coming down in a slow, steady rhythm outside, the kind of rain that seeps into your bones. Inside, my living room was exactly as it had been for years. A worn leather couch, a small bookshelf, and a framed wedding photo of my late wife, Margaret. She's been gone for 8 years, but her smile still warms the room in a way I can't. We built this life together. Nothing extravagant, just enough. I worked as a senior loan officer at a local bank for over 30 years. Margaret stayed home with our daughter, Emily, making sure she grew up knowing the value of kindness, loyalty, and living within your means. Emily was my pride. She was my reason for getting up every morning. I still remember her first day of school, her little backpack bouncing against her shoulders, turning back to wave with that fearless grin. Now she's 28. Bright, beautiful, and in love. She's marrying into one of the wealthiest families in Bellevue, the Thompsons. Richard and Margaret Thompson, owners of Thompson's Fine Dining, live in a glass mansion on the hill. Their driveway fits 6 luxury cars. Mine barely fits my old Ford. I wanted to believe this was her fairy tale, but lately I've seen the way she looks at me, as if I'm not enough anymore. At the time, I didn't know how deep that feeling would cut, or how far I'd go to remind her and the Thompsons exactly who I am. Some fathers show love through words. Mine came through actions, through being there. When Margaret passed, Emily was only 20. I remember sitting with her on the porch that night, the 2 of us wrapped in a blanket, listening to the rain. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. We just stayed there, holding on. After that, I became both parents. I learned how to braid hair badly, but she laughed every time. I packed lunches with little notes inside. "You're stronger than you think." I was there at every school play, every soccer game, every broken heart. Money was never abundant, but time was. On her 16th birthday, she wanted a car. I found a used Honda Civic, nothing flashy but reliable. She hugged me like I'd given her the world. That's what I thought being a father was, giving what you can, being present when it matters. We took road trips in that old car, no resorts, no 5-star hotels. Just cheap motels, small diners, and hours of talking about everything and nothing. She used to call those trips our adventures. Back then, Emily's dreams were simple. She wanted a cozy house, maybe 2 kids, and a life filled with love, not things. That's what Margaret had taught her. That's what I believed we'd given her. But somewhere along the way, the sparkle in her eyes started chasing something else. She used to dream about love. Now she talks about square footage and brand names. I didn't realize it yet, but the little girl who once valued late-night talks over luxury was slipping away from me. It started on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I was sitting in my study reading the paper when the front door swung open. Emily stepped inside, still wearing her tailored coat car keys jingling in her manicured hand. "Dad," she said without sitting down, "I need $35,000 for the wedding. No hello, no small talk, just a number one that landed like a hammer." I set the paper aside. "Emily, that's nearly a quarter of my entire retirement savings." She paced across the hardwood floor, heels clicking in sharp, impatient beats. "The venue's already booked. The flowers the photographer deposits are paid. This is the most important day of my life. The Thompsons have covered their part. Now it's your turn." My turn. I stood walking to my desk. "Sweetheart, I can give you $8,000. That's all I can afford without risking my home." She stopped pacing. Her face hardened. $8,000. That's pathetic. I pulled out my bank statements, sliding them toward her. "This is what I have left. After your mother's medical bills. After her funeral." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't bring Mom into this." The words cut deeper than the request itself. She turned for the door, grabbing her purse. "I'll give you a week to figure it out. The Thompsons say a real father would find a way." The door shut behind her and the rain outside suddenly sounded louder. That was the night I realized. My daughter wasn't just asking for money. She was asking me to measure my worth in dollars. And soon, she'd learn I was worth far more than she imagined. 3 days later, the sound came not from a knock on my door, but from my phone. A text, just one sentence. "Don't come to my wedding. You're not my family anymore." I stared at the screen. The words didn't yell, didn't curse, but they sliced cleaner than any knife. 28 years of fatherhood, the late nights, the lunches, the long drives just to hear about her day, all dismissed in 12 cold words. I typed a response, then erased it. Typed again, deleted. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as if finding the right arrangement of letters might undo the damage. "Emily, please, we can work this out. Delete." How can you say that to your own father? Delete. After everything I've done for you, delete. Finally, I wrote 2 words. "I understand." Sent. The message was delivered. Read. No reply. I set the phone down and looked around my living room, the framed photos of birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings. Each one now felt like evidence of a crime I didn't commit. It was quiet. Too quiet. And in that silence, something began to shift. The ache in my chest didn't go away, but it changed. It hardened. It focused. If she wanted me erased from her life, then I'd show her and the Thompsons exactly what kind of man they'd just tried to bury. The first day, the calls came slow, almost polite. "Dad, maybe I was too harsh. Let's talk," Emily's voice said in the first voicemail, like she was testing the water. By noon, there were 3 more. I didn't answer. By the second day, politeness had evaporated. Richard's voice replaced hers in my inbox. "We need to talk like men. This silent treatment isn't helping anyone." His tone carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. Still, I didn't answer. I kept track of every call in my old banking ledger. Time caller, emotional tone, just like I used to track suspicious transactions. By the 3rd day, the pattern was obvious. Morning calls carried hope. Afternoon calls turned sharp, and evening calls bled desperation. Richard's voice cracked once. Jason, her fiancé, left awkward, stammering messages. And Emily's voice was different now. "Dad, please, I'm sorry. We can fix this. Just call me." By hour 72, there were 83 missed calls. I sat in my quiet kitchen coffee, warm in my hand, watching the phone light up again. I didn't touch it. The silence wasn't punishment, it was strategy. Because every unanswered call was shifting the balance. They thought they had power. They didn't realize I'd been patient my whole life. And now I was just getting started. On the morning of the fourth day, I sat at my desk, the same one I'd used for 30 years at the bank, flipping through my old address book. Most names were crossed out or faded ghosts of a life long gone. But one name stood out, written in my own careful handwriting. Stephen Clark, Private Investigations. I'd worked with Stephen back in my banking days. He was the man we called when a case needed more than numbers, when it needed the truth. I pulled the business card from the page, still crisp despite the years. Call if you ever need anything, he'd said the day he left the bank. It was time. I dialed. Stephen Clark Investigations. Stephen, it's Bob Martin. A pause, then a warm laugh. Bob Martin, from First National. I thought you retired to play golf. I don't play golf, I need information. Comprehensive, on Richard and Margaret Thompson. Spokane. His tone shifted to pure business. Scope. Everything. Financials, property, legal records. If there's dirt, I want it. That's a full package. Cost is $2,000 up front, the rest on completion. I didn't hesitate. Done. He asked for addresses, business names, anything I could provide. I told him about Thompson's fine dining, about the luxury that didn't match their supposed income. When I hung up, the silence in the room felt different charged. This wasn't just a father's hurt anymore. It was an investigation, and I was ready to follow the money. 2 days after our call, Stephen rang me back. Bob, he said, I think you're going to like this. He dug into public records, first the kind anyone could find if they knew where to look, and already things weren't adding up. On paper, Stephen continued the Thompsons' report about $80,000 a year from their restaurant. I frowned. 80? They spend that much on wine for one wedding. Exactly, Stephen said. And here's the fun part. Their property records show they bought a $2.3 million home last year, paid in cash. I leaned back in my chair. The image of Richard in his tailored tux pouring $200 wine like it was tap water came back to me. Stephen wasn't done. They also own 3 BMWs, a country club membership, and a vacation condo in Palm Springs. None of it makes sense with their declared income. How solid is this, I asked. Solid enough that if I keep digging, we might trip over something federal. I felt the old banker's instincts clicking into place, the same ones that had caught embezzlers and loan scammers back in the day. Keep going, I told him. And Stephen, if this trail leads where I think it does, I want every piece of it documented. There was a pause on the line. You planning to take them to court? I smiled to myself. No, I'm planning to take them somewhere worse. Stephen didn't waste time. By the end of the week, he was sitting across from me at Riverside Coffee, a thick manila folder between us. You're going to want to see this, he said, sliding it over. Inside were photocopies of bank statements, invoices, and payment records. At first glance, it looked like any restaurant's paperwork. But then the names jumped out at me. Heritage Wedding Catering, Platinum Events. I frowned. They're not real, are they? Stephen shook his head. Half of them don't exist. The other half swear they've never done business with the Thompsons. He laid out the timeline, small deposits a few years back, 5 or 8,000 at a time. Then in the last year it exploded into $60,000 events every month. Always just under the federal reporting threshold. Structured deposits, I said quietly. Stephen grinned. Knew you'd see it. And here's the kicker, those payments line up perfectly with large cash withdrawals and luxury purchases. Cars, jewelry, that beachfront condo. I flipped through page after page, the pattern undeniable. This wasn't sloppy crime. It was a well-oiled laundering machine. How solid is it, I asked. Solid enough for the IRS, the state, and maybe the FBI. I closed the folder slowly. The evidence felt heavy in my hands, heavy enough to crush reputations, lives, and the fantasy my daughter had built. They wanted to play with stolen money, I said, meeting Stephen's eyes. Now, I smiled coldly. Let's see how they handle losing it. The invitation came through Emily. "Dad," she said on the phone, her voice unusually soft. "The Thompsons want to have you over for dinner. They think it's time to clear the air." I agreed instantly. Not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I wanted to see their operation up close. Thompson's fine dining looked even more opulent at night. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished wood, the air rich with the scent of expensive wine. Richard and Margaret were already seated at their favorite corner table, the one with a clear view of the entire room. Robert Richard said, standing to shake my hand, "Glad you could join us." I smiled, wouldn't miss it. The conversation started: light wedding plans, menu choices, guest lists. But while they talked, my eyes were busy. At a table near the bar, a man slid an envelope across to a server who tucked it into her apron without a word. No receipt, no register. 2 tables over, a sharply dressed woman paid with 3 different credit cards and a wad of cash. Margaret poured me a glass of Bordeaux. "We believe family should enjoy the best," she said. I sipped, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her shift in her seat. "Yes," I replied evenly. "I've always believed family should see the truth, eventually." Her smile froze for half a second. I made a mental note that half-second was worth more than the wine. That night I sat at my dining table, the same spot where Margaret's crystal vase once held my late wife's roses. Now it was my war room. Stephen's folders lay open in neat stacks: bank statements, property records, fake invoices. My own notes filled a leather-bound ledger, every transaction labeled, every suspicious moment from dinner annotated. I'd always believed revenge wasn't about rage. It was about precision, timing, making sure the blow landed where it would hurt most. The Thompsons had built their empire on a mountain of falsified documents and silent transactions. I was going to use those same tools to tear it down. Step 1. Triple backup every piece of evidence, 1 copy at home, 1 in a safety deposit box, 1 on an encrypted drive. Step 2. Draft formal complaints to the IRS, the State Revenue Department, and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Each would receive a complete package mailed from different post offices to avoid any trail leading back too soon. Step 3. Prepare a special wedding gift for Emily. Not jewelry, not a check, but the truth. A curated portfolio of her new parents' crimes, organized in a way she couldn't ignore. I closed the ledger and leaned back, listening to the quiet hum of my refrigerator. Somewhere across town, Richard and Margaret were probably toasting another night of untouchable luxury. They had no idea the countdown had already started. 3 days before the wedding, I finished assembling Emily's gift. It wasn't wrapped in glossy paper or tied with ribbon. Instead, it was housed in a black leather portfolio, the kind executives use for high-stakes meetings. Inside, every page told a story not of love and celebration, but of fraud, greed, and betrayal. The first section was simple bank statements showing massive deposits from companies that didn't exist. The second, copies of fake invoices, each one cross-referenced with the dates of lavish purchases. The third, property records and vehicle registrations, proof that the Thompsons' lifestyle far exceeded their declared income. And finally, a cover letter written in my own hand. "Emily, I hope you'll read this with the same attention I gave to raising you. These are the people you've chosen as your new parents. Love, Dad." I ran my fingers over the leather one last time. This wasn't just evidence, it was a mirror. A way for her to see what I had seen without me raising my voice, without me begging. On the morning of the wedding, I would hand it to her quietly. No speeches, no theatrics. Just a father's gift of truth delivered at the moment it would matter most. By the time she opened it, the letters to the IRS, the state, and the FBI would already be in the mail. The Thompsons thought they were hosting a celebration. What they didn't know was that it was also their wake. The ceremony hall glittered under chandeliers, every table draped in white silk and crowned with roses. It was exactly the kind of grandeur the Thompsons lived for, not love, not family, but spectacle. I arrived early, portfolio in hand, dressed in my best suit. Emily spotted me near the entrance, her face lighting up in a way that twisted something in my chest. "Dad, you came," she said, rushing forward in her gown. I smiled softly. "I wouldn't miss it. Here, I have something for you." Her brows lifted as I placed the black leather portfolio into her hands. "Don't open it now," I told her. "Read it tonight, when you have time to really see it." She hugged me, the portfolio pressed between us like an unspoken truth. The ceremony began. Richard Thompson walked her down the aisle, smiling as though he owned the moment, and in his mind maybe he did. Margaret sat in the front row, nodding graciously at every guest who whispered about their generosity. I sat in the third row, an outsider in my own daughter's wedding, watching the Thompsons bask in praise built on stolen money. Vows were exchanged, applause thundered, and cameras flashed. The guests saw love. I saw a countdown. In 6 hours, Emily would open that portfolio. In 6 days, the IRS and FBI would open their investigation. And in 6 months, the Thompsons would be nothing more than a headline. The reception was in full swing. Champagne flowed, laughter echoed, and the Thompsons glided from table to table like royalty. Emily, glowing in her gown, had barely left Jason's side. The black leather portfolio sat on the head table beside her bridal bag. I knew the moment had happened because the music faltered just for a beat. Emily had opened it. Her smile froze as she flipped through the first pages. Bank statements, fake invoices, property records. Jason leaned over, reading with her. His brow furrowed, then darkened. He looked at Richard and Margaret like he was seeing strangers. Emily Hyde, and his voice carried over the music, sharp and trembling. "Is this true?" Conversations died. Gaze turned. Phones appeared recording. Richard tried to laugh it off. "Your father's just bitter, jealous." I stepped forward, my voice calm but cutting. "Jealous, no. Just informed. That's over $400,000 in unreported income, and that's only the last 3 years. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Margaret reached for the documents, but Emily pulled them away. "You paid for my wedding. With stolen money." Richard's smile cracked. "We can talk about this privately." "No." Emily snapped, tears brimming. "Everyone should hear it." I looked around at the silent crowd. The IRS, the state, and the FBI will be hearing it too. The complaints were filed 3 days ago. The chandeliers glittered above us, but the room felt ice cold. The Thompsons' empire had just shattered, not in a courtroom, but in front of 200 witnesses. 5 days after the wedding, Emily showed up at my door. No gown, no makeup, just a pale face and red eyes. In her arms, she carried a box. She stepped inside without a word and set it on my coffee table. I looked inside: jewelry, designer purses, expensive shoes, all the gifts from the Thompsons. "I can't keep any of it," she said quietly. "Not after knowing where it came from." I nodded, watching her wipe her eyes. "The IRS came yesterday," she continued. "They shut the restaurant down, took boxes of files. Richard tried to call me, but I couldn't answer." Her voice cracked on that last sentence, and for the first time in years I saw my little girl again, not the entitled stranger from months before. I'm so sorry, Dad. I didn't believe you would ever let me down, but I let you down. I sat beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. You were manipulated by people who knew exactly what they were doing, but you came back. She looked at me through tears. Do you still love me? Always, I said. Real love isn't bought, Emily, and it can't be stolen. Outside, the world went on as usual. But in that small living room, something broken had begun to heal. 2 weeks later, Emily and I sat on the back porch of my small house. The spring air carried the smell of fresh-cut grass, the same scent from her childhood summers. She had a notebook in her lap filled with plans not for a honeymoon, not for luxury, but for a modest ceremony with close friends. I don't want the big show anymore, she said. Just something real. Something Mom would have been proud of. I smiled. That's a wedding worth having. Jason had decided to stand by her. His parents, facing multiple federal charges, had been denied bail. Their empire of crystal and steel was gone, replaced by court summons and frozen accounts. Emily stared out at the yard where she once played with a plastic baseball bat. You know, I thought I wanted their life. The cars, the parties, the people who knew your name. But it wasn't real, none of it. It's easy to mistake noise for meaning, I said. Real things are usually quieter. We sat in silence, watching the sun dip lower. She reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm glad you were quiet, Dad. You didn't fight me with shouting. You just showed me the truth. Her voice was steady now. No tremor, no shame, just understanding. When she left that evening, she took nothing from the Thompsons with her. And I knew for the first time in years she was walking towards something honest.